What if the darkest secrets of post-war America weren't in history books, but hidden in forgotten reels of celluloid smoke and shadow? Film noir once captured a nation's paranoia, fear, and fractured morality. Yet, some of its boldest masterpieces vanished into oblivion, buried by studios and lost prints. Today, we resurrect 12 film noir classics still alive on YouTube, waiting to be rediscovered. Number 12. The Glass Key. 1942. Once hailed as one of the sharpest crime dramas of its day, The Glass Key blurred the line between loyalty and betrayal. Based on Dashiell Hammett's novel, it followed a political fixer, played by Brian Donlevy, who becomes entangled in murder deceit and a dangerous love triangle involving his boss's mistress. The movie's world was built on shadows, both literal and moral. Audiences of the early 40s had rarely seen such unflinching depictions of corruption or double-dealing within American politics. It was a mirror too clear for some. Rumors swirled that several studio executives demanded changes to the dialogue, fearing it echoed real scandals in Washington. Behind the scenes, production was tense. Director Stuart Heisler clashed with Paramount brass over its bleak ending. Even leading man Alan Ladd was nearly recast for being too cold, too unreadable, too real. Yet that emotional chill became the film's strength, giving Noir its signature detachment. When released, it earned modest praise but was soon overshadowed by The Maltese Falcon. Then, decades later, it resurfaced on late-night television. Critics suddenly saw its quiet precision, its moral unease, its daring refusal to comfort the viewer. The Glass Key endures as a ghost of democracy's darker corners, reminding us that truth once exposed is never neat, never safe, and never easily buried. Number 11. Scarlet Street, 1945. Scarlet Street shocked audiences who thought they knew film noir. Directed by Fritz Lang, it told the story of a timid cashier played by Edward G. Robinson, whose obsession with a manipulative woman leads him down a path of murder and madness. It was a brutal portrait of weakness in the face of desire. What made it so dangerous was its honesty. No studio wanted to admit that American life could rot beneath polite smiles. When censors saw the rough cut, they panicked. The Production Code Office tried to cut entire scenes, claiming the movie glorified sin. Lang refused. Instead, he rewrote dialogue to hide the violence and suggestion, letting the viewer's imagination do the damage. The controversy didn't end there. 3 cities, including Atlanta, banned the film for moral indecency. Even television syndication avoided it for years. Lang's past as a German exile also stirred whispers that he was smuggling anti-American bitterness into Hollywood, but the movie refused to die. Rediscovered in public domain prints, it spread freely on YouTube decades later, gaining fresh praise as one of Lang's finest. Psychological studies. Its shadows breathe despair. Its silence screams guilt. Scarlet Street remains a lesson that darkness doesn't always come from villains. Sometimes it's born from the faintest act of cowardice, hiding in plain daylight. Number 10. They Live by Night, 1948. When Nicholas Ray made They Live by Night, he wasn't just directing a crime story, he was inventing the tragic modern romance of doomed youth. The film followed 2 escaped convicts, Bowie and Keechie, running from the world and from themselves. It was tender, yet fatalistic, drenched in rain and loneliness. Audiences in the late 40s weren't ready. Warner Brothers delayed its release for 2 years, fearing its sympathetic portrayal of fugitives would anger conservatives. The studio even tried renaming it To Your Red Wagon, hoping to soften its tone. Ray fought back, knowing his film was about the poetry of love under pressure, not politics. On-set conditions were raw. Kathy O'Donnell and Farley Granger acted through exhaustion in real locations rather than sets. Some nights they filmed with no permits, just headlights and fog. The risk gave the movie its pulse. When finally released, critics dismissed it as too bleak, too sentimental. Yet the French New Wave would later worship it, calling it the dawn of romantic realism. For decades, it drifted unseen until digital restorations revived its heartbeat. Now on YouTube, its story unfolds again, every frame whispering about freedom, faith, and the doomed beauty of ordinary lives. They Live by Night teaches that love in a cruel world is rebellion, and sometimes rebellion is the only truth worth dying for. Number 9. Detour, 1945. Detour was a film born out of desperation and defiance. It was shot in less than a week, with barely enough money to feed the crew. Directed by Edgar Ulmer, who had once worked with greats of German Expressionism before being exiled to Hollywood's poverty row. What he created was a nightmare on celluloid. The film followed Al Roberts, a weary piano player who hitchhikes from New York to California. His dream is simple, to reach his fiancée. But fate has a crueler plan. He accepts a ride from a stranger who suddenly dies, leaving Al trapped in a nightmare of mistaken identity guilt and doom. When he later meets Vera, a drifter with the sharpness of a knife, the story descends into fatalism. Ulmer's sets were cheap. His lighting was improvised, yet every flicker of shadow, every reflection in a rain-soaked windshield became part of the atmosphere of doom. The censors tried to interfere. They objected to the ending, claiming it showed crime without punishment. Ulmer argued that the punishment was spiritual, not legal. He won that battle. Critics at the time dismissed Detour as too depressing, too strange. But later generations saw the genius, the way the camera seemed to trap the characters in their own moral fog, the way chance itself felt like a villain. For years, it vanished into public domain prints and scratchy reels. Now it breathes again on YouTube, a ghostly transmission from a doomed universe. Detour's power lies in its simplicity, a story told with nothing but sweat shadows and fear. It is proof that truth does not need budget or beauty to haunt the human soul. It only needs honesty. Number 8. The Big Combo, 1955. The Big Combo stands as one of the most brutal and hypnotic noirs ever filmed. Director Joseph H. Lewis took a low-budget gangster script and turned it into visual poetry. His hero, Lieutenant Diamond, was no saint. His villain, Mr. Brown, was no cartoon. Their war was personal, moral, and doomed from the start. The film's cinematography by John Alton changed everything. He used single light bulbs and fog machines to create a world where figures were silhouettes trapped between darkness and blinding white. The final gunfight, staged in a warehouse filled with mist, remains one of cinema's most haunting images. When censors first saw the film, they panicked. The violence felt too real, the cruelty too casual. They demanded cuts to scenes showing torture by sound alone. Lewis refused to soften it. He believed that evil was not in action but in suggestion. His rebellion nearly cost him his contract. Audiences were uneasy. Critics called it immoral and joyless. For decades, it faded from memory. Then, film scholars in Europe rediscovered it, calling it a masterpiece of light and shadow. Its themes of obsession and control influenced generations of filmmakers from Scorsese to Ridley Scott. Watching The Big Combo today on YouTube is like standing in the middle of a moral storm. Every frame is soaked in paranoia. Every whisper carries menace. It reminds us that power corrupts, but obsession corrodes from the inside out. Number 7. DOA, 1950. Few films open with such cold fatalism. A man staggers into a police station to report his own murder. His name is Frank Bigelow. He has been poisoned. He has hours to live. What follows is a desperate race against time through neon bars and indifferent faces. Director Rudolph Mattei crafted DOA like a nightmare documentary. The story unfolded in flashback, a dying man reliving the last days of his life, trying to discover who killed him and why. It was a structure decades ahead of its time. The pacing relentless, the tension suffocating. The censors were uncomfortable. There was no redemption, no lesson, just death and despair. They asked for a moral ending, but Mattei refused. He believed the story's tragedy was its morality, that sometimes justice dies first. Behind the scenes, the shoot was brutal. The crew filmed real streets at night with hidden cameras. Actors performed while crowds walked by unaware. Funding nearly collapsed twice. Edward O'Brien, the star, fainted during one take from exhaustion. Yet those hardships gave the film its pulse. When released, it struggled to find audiences. Too bleak for American tastes, too honest for studio comfort. But in Europe, it became a cult symbol of existential dread. Later, it entered the public domain where it found new life. Today, DOA thrives online. It plays like a message from beyond the grave. Every shot whispers that life is fragile, every choice irreversible. The film's final line is not written but felt. We are all dying from the moment we begin. Number 6. Night and the City, 1950. Night and the City is a film that feels like a fever dream from which no one wakes up. Directed by Jules Dassin after his exile from Hollywood during the Blacklist era, it became his revenge against the system that betrayed him. Shot entirely on the damp streets of post-war London, it followed a desperate con man named Harry Fabian, played by Richard Widmark, who dreamed of controlling the city's underground wrestling scene. Harry was no hero. He was the embodiment of hustler ambition burning itself alive. The film's tone was relentless, soaked in rain and despair. Dassin shot scenes at dawn when London looked like a corpse bathed in fog. Every frame screamed loneliness. The censorship troubles began early. Hollywood studio heads feared Dassin's political associations and tried to bury the film. Even its release was sabotaged. Two versions were cut, one for Britain, one for America. The British version carried haunting music by Benjamin Frankel. The American one had brassy, overwrought scoring by Franz Waxman. Both versions clashed and confused critics. On release, it failed. American audiences wanted heroes, not doomed hustlers, but the film refused to vanish. French critics years later hailed it as a masterpiece of despair. Its visual style influenced generations of noir and neo-noir from Raging Bull to Taxi Driver. Now, Night and the City glows again online, restored and alive. Watching it feels like staring into the eyes of a man drowning in his own ambition. It teaches that in the city's darkness, no one wins, only those who fall learn the truth. But number 5, Gun Crazy, 1949. Gun Crazy was pure fire before America was ready to handle it. Directed by Joseph H. Lewis, it told the story of a quiet man with an obsession for guns and the deadly woman who turns that obsession into destruction. The film starred Peggy Cummins and John Dahl, two faces, who burned through the screen with tragic magnetism. It was a love story disguised as a heist movie, a tale of passion, crime, and fate. The camera followed them through real streets during robberies filmed in long single takes from the back seat of their getaway car. Those sequences remain among the most thrilling in all of noir. Censors hated it. They called it immoral, dangerous, even seditious. The studio tried to bury it under new titles, but audiences whispered about it. Critics ignored it. The film vanished. Decades later, it returned as an icon of rebellion, influencing Bonnie and Clyde and countless outlaw films that came after. Behind the scenes, Joseph H. Lewis fought executives for artistic control. He hired real townsfolk as extras and shot without permits. He said the law itself had become part of the story. Peggy Cummins delivered a performance so fearless that even years later, film historians called her the ultimate noir siren, not glamorous, but feral, human, tragic. Gun Crazy lives again on YouTube in pristine restoration. It remains a study of obsession and decay, of two people trying to escape fate and instead running straight into its mouth. Every shot, every heartbeat says one truth: desire without conscience always destroys. Number 4, The Narrow Margin, 1952. The Narrow Margin was a thriller made with the speed of a train and the heartbeat of a gunshot. Directed by Richard Fleischer for RKO, it became one of the tightest, purest noirs ever made. The story followed a tough cop escorting a gangster's widow on a cross-country train while hitmen lurked in every shadowed corridor. Its production was a miracle of economy. Fleischer shot almost the entire movie inside a cramped set built to mimic a real train. He used mirrors to widen the frame and camera tricks to create claustrophobia. The sound of the tracks became part of the tension, like a ticking clock of doom. The studio nearly shelved it, fearing it was too small, too bleak. Test audiences were stunned by its realism. Critics later called it the best B-picture ever made. The performances by Charles McGraw and Marie Windsor turned ordinary dialogue into moral warfare. Censorship was minimal, but studio executives demanded a lighter ending. Fleischer refused. He argued that noir was about inevitability, not comfort. The film was released as he intended. It flopped at first and vanished. Years later, it was rediscovered by critics who realized its precision and power. Today, The Narrow Margin runs again online, breathing fast, sharp, and merciless. Every door that opens hides a gun. Every whisper carries doom. It is the definition of what film noir truly means. Not style, but survival. Not romance, but ruin. Number 3, The Killers, 1946. The Killers began with a single question that could haunt any man. Why does a man wait calmly for death? That opening line, written by Ernest Hemingway, became the heart of this dark masterpiece, directed by Robert Siodmak. Burt Lancaster made his screen debut as the doomed boxer nicknamed the Swede. The film opened with his murder shown in eerie silence. Then, through flashbacks, the story unraveled. Insurance investigators pieced together his past, his betrayal, and the woman who sealed his fate. Ava Gardner played Kitty Collins, a femme fatale carved from smoke and deceit. The film was controversial from its first screening. Its violence, its amorality, and its seductive tone enraged censors. The Production Code Office insisted that murder and adultery could not appear so intimately connected. Universal refused to tone it down. The executives feared backlash, but Siodmak stood firm. He argued that this was not crime as entertainment. It was destiny as tragedy. Behind the camera, tensions boiled. Lancaster struggled with insecurity, terrified of failing in his first major role. Ava Gardner resented being typecast, yet her icy magnetism gave the film its pulse. Siodmak's direction was precise, every light and shadow calculated. The insurance narrative framework turned the story into an autopsy of the human soul. Audiences responded with fascination. Critics called it one of the purest expressions of fatalism ever filmed. Decades later, it inspired remakes and homages from Andrei Tarkovsky to Don Siegel. The Killers became a blueprint for modern noir. Today, the film thrives again on YouTube. Its shadows still breathe, its silences still burn. It asks one eternal question. When fate comes knocking, will you run, or simply accept that it has already won? Number 2. Out of the Past, 1947. Out of the Past remains the purest essence of noir. Every cigarette ember, every half-truth, every fatal glance belongs to this masterpiece. Directed by Jacques Tourneur and starring Robert Mitchum, Jane Greer, and Kirk Douglas, it became the gospel of doomed romance. The story followed Jeff Bailey, a man trying to escape his past as a private detective who once betrayed and was betrayed. He meets the woman again, and the cycle begins anew. The structure was complex, layered with flashbacks and lies. The dialogue felt like smoke curling into the dark. When released, the studio doubted it would succeed. Executives complained that it was too dark, too complicated, too cynical. But audiences understood. They saw themselves in Jeff Bailey trapped between desire and destiny. Censors objected to the implied corruption and to the femme fatale's power over men. Tourneur refused to dilute her strength. Behind the scenes, Mitchum was at his most detached, yet magnetic. He spoke lines that felt carved from stone. Jane Greer balanced innocence and venom so precisely that critics called her performance dangerous. Tourneur's use of light and silence gave the film a dreamlike rhythm, as if fate itself were directing. The film flopped slightly, then slowly rose to legend. Directors like Polanski, Lynch, and the Coen brothers later paid tribute. Out of the Past is not a story. It is a confession whispered through fog. Watch it today, and it still feels alive. The moral rot, the tenderness, the sense that every choice has already been made. Out of the Past endures because no one ever truly escapes. We only circle back, always back into the shadows. Number 1. The Third Man, 1949. Few films transcend their genre yet remain true to it. The Third Man did both. Directed by Carol Reed, written by Graham Greene, and set in the ruins of post-war Vienna, it became the crown jewel of film noir. The plot was simple but devastating. Holly Martins, an American writer, arrives in Vienna to meet his friend Harry Lime, only to find him dead. But nothing in Vienna is what it seems. Lime, played by Orson Welles, is not a corpse, but a phantom, profiting from the black market and stolen penicillin. The film's atmosphere was surreal. Reed filmed on tilted angles through sewers and bombed buildings, creating a city that looked diseased. The zither score by Anton Karas was haunting and ironic, turning tension into melody. Controversy followed everywhere. The British censors worried about its portrayal of corruption within the Allied zones. The Americans feared its cynicism toward Western morality. Even Welles himself refused to cooperate fully, forcing Reed to chase him through real tunnels beneath Vienna. Those moments became legendary. At release, The Third Man electrified critics. It won the Grand Prix at Cannes and became one of the most influential films ever made. Its famous Ferris wheel scene turned philosophical despair into visual poetry. The closing shot of Alida Valli walking past Joseph Cotten without a glance remains one of cinema's coldest heartbreaks. On YouTube, the film endures in pristine restoration. Every echo in those sewers, every shadowed street, every mocking smile of Harry Lime reminds us that evil often hides behind charm. The Third Man is not just noir. It is the moral X-ray of the 20th century. 12 forgotten noir dreams revived from dust and darkness. Each one a confession of fear and longing from a time when truth wore a fedora and hope walked alone at night. Which of these shadows spoke to you the most? Tell us below. Hit subscribe for more lost gems and step with us again into the dark.